Hi there! If this is your first time here, welcome to the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. I'm your host, Markella Kaplani, a psychologist, a parenthood and relationship coach, and a parent myself. Together, we explore the transformative journey of parenthood and its profound impact on our relationship with ourselves, our partners, and our children, so that we can be present and show up as we envision without having to do more. Let's get into today's episode. Hello everyone and welcome to today's episode. This episode is a little bit different than others. I was actually very much inspired by a comment that I read in a Facebook group. I am not going to be sharing what group or who commented, of course, keeping anonymity and privacy as top priority. But I'm really excited about today's topic because it's one that hits home for many of us, and I know it definitely does for me. So as I said, I came across this question in a Facebook group, which basically said, how did we go from it takes a village to it's nobody's responsibility to watch your kids but you? Now, this is such a profound question because it taps into the heart of our parenting experience and the societal shifts that we've seen over the years. I don't think I would have made an episode about this if I hadn't gone into the comment section. Now, mind you, I'm reading this while I am in bed scrolling a little bit before I fall asleep, and I have all these thoughts of how I want to respond, and I also see some of the other comments, and it's really late, and I know I'm not going to articulate myself at all well, so I decide that I'm not going to comment right there and then, and I am going to make an episode about this. So yeah, we're going to unpack this today, and I promise this is going to be an enlightening discussion. So let's start by looking at the original post and the kind of feedback it received. This will give us a good foundation for exploring the broader issues that are at play. So like I said, this post received a lot of feedback. And let me tell you, the comments were quite revealing of how we think today, both the helpful and the not so helpful ways that we think about certain issues. Many people chimed in, sharing their thoughts on why the concept of the village has changed so much. One commenter summed it up by saying that the village became toxic. This comment alone gathered a lot of positive responses, a lot of agreement, with people echoing sentiments like literally and saying, oh yes, that's exactly what was in my head. It's so true. Another commenter, on the other hand, provided a more detailed explanation of how she was thinking about the matter. She suggested that the shift may have come from people taking the village for granted. Now, this was very interesting to me. She painted a vivid picture. Some parents, she said, go out and they party and they act as though they have no kids. They turn to this village for financial help or to cover their responsibilities. This, she argued, has led to a breakdown in trust and a sense of resentment among those who are supposed to be the supportive village. Now, while these points are valid and they reflect some of people's experiences, I want to present a different perspective today. But first, it is important to acknowledge that these feelings are valid and to understand where they're coming from. The village, as many of us knew it, has indeed changed. And it's not for the better. Many of us wonder where this village has gone. Others may have this village and may feel like it's not supportive at all. It's not really a village just because we have family in our lives. But what really has led to this breakdown? Why do so many mothers feel so alone in their motherhood journey? How did we get here? We moved, essentially, from a community-centric approach to one that seems completely isolated. Well, a lot of this shift has to do with our society's increasing emphasis on individualism. Before ever reading the comments, that was my first and foremost thought as I read the author's question. Over the past few decades, there's been a significant cultural push toward valuing independence and self-sufficiency. The narrative has become that success means doing everything on your own, providing that you can handle all the challenges without needing to rely on others. While there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to be independent, really, independence is something that I value a lot. Still, this cultural shift has made us more egotistical. it's made us more eager to prove that we can manage everything by ourselves. This mindset, when applied to parenting, can be incredibly isolating and overwhelming. Think about it. Just humor me for a second. We're constantly bombarded with messages about how we should be super parents. We should be juggling careers. We should be into personal development. And we should also be doing parenting without breaking a sweat. We see it all around social media. All these perfect families with their perfect lives and the picket fence house. It's no wonder why many of us feel the need to prove that we can do it all alone. As I say this, I'm thinking of someone who has always been a very successful person, very ambitious, very independent, very successful. Anything she set her mind to, she could do it. And so when she became a mother, this kind of attitude and this kind of philosophy spilled into that as well. To the extent that even though she had her mom move in with her, she was unwilling to use her help. And I don't know how that sounds to you, but to me, it was kind of like, but that's exactly the reason why she's there. But she felt guilty to ask her as though she's not supposed to. So then we're going back to the concept of individualism and how your kids are your responsibility. But also she felt like she needed to prove that she could do it on her own. One concern that she shared with me, and that I've actually heard from other women as well in different iterations, was that single moms can do this on their own, and so I should be able to do it too. And so despite the fact that she had some help from her husband, and she also had her mom at home, and at some point she also had help inside the house, to a great extent she refused to access this help, to use it. Not because she didn't trust the village, not because she felt it was toxic, but because she felt that if she needed so much help, it would deem her a failure at motherhood. Now, I can tell you all of this because we worked on this together. We dissected all of the reasons why she was overwhelmed and she was sleep deprived and she felt like she was stuck and trapped in all of this, even though she recognized that she had quite a bit more help than other mothers she got to speak to. This focus on individualism has eroded the traditional concept of the village. Instead of relying on community support, many of us feel that we should bear all the burdens of raising children ourselves. And so we don't accept the help. And this can lead to burnout and stress and a sense of isolation. But it doesn't have to be this way. Acknowledging the value of community and the importance of asking for help doesn't have to mean that we are failing as parents. These two things are not synonymous. They're not equal. It means we're human. And we're recognizing that raising children is and has always and will always be a collective effort. And now I want to narrow in on the comment about the village being toxic. It's vital to acknowledge that our awareness of certain toxic elements in past parenting practices has increased. And that's good. That's progress. We're realizing that certain things that our parents' generation did and their parents' generation did are outdated and they don't fit with our ideals and the way that we want to parent now and the research that has been done in these areas. While the idea of a supportive village sounds ideal, the reality was often far from perfect. Previous generations operated under a different set of norms and expectations, many of which we now recognize as quite problematic. For example, there were very rigid gender roles that dictated that mothers were primarily responsible for child rearing, while fathers were often less involved, and that was okay. This not only placed an enormous burden on women, but it also perpetuated gender inequality, something that we are not okay with right now. It's a good thing that we want to break away from that. And then again, there were these experts, right, in the past that were working on a completely different agenda based on completely different studies and research, giving advice that is now considered quite harmful. We don't have to go way back. Think about practices like letting babies cry it out without giving them comfort, without showing up for them, teaching them, training them on sleep, ignoring the fact that they're communicating with their crying some need that they have. think about the use of corporal punishment. And these were all standard, but now we understand that they had a negative impact on us, on our emotional well-being. And so I get it. The village, in this traditional sense, could also be a place of judgment and unsolicited advice. And I'm thinking of two ways that this is true. One is that so long as we are connected to this village, we get a lot of pressure to conform. We get a lot of feedback telling us about our parenting style and how it could be spoiling children or how it's not the right way to go. And this kind of criticism, especially if we're going through a tough phase of parenthood, and, well, all phases have their tough spots, don't they? This kind of criticism can make us doubt ourselves. And even though we know that we don't want to follow what they were doing, at the same time, we may find ourselves questioning whether we are right to do what we're doing. And this can ultimately lead to a sense of inadequacy and stress. At the same time, we might worry that if we let our children be raised by this village, at least in part, we are relinquishing some of the control that we have over the way that they are parented, over the values that are being instilled in them. And so we worry that we may not be able to shield them from all the things that we needed to be protected from, that we may be setting them up to have similar traumas, big or small, like we did. And here is my take on all of this. While it's crucial to avoid these toxic elements, we also need to be forgiving with the previous generation. They were doing the best they could with the information and the cultural norms of the time. It's important to understand that they operated within the constraints of what was accepted and recommended by experts back then. And more so than anything else, it's so important that we are compassionate, that we learn to look at our village. And when I say the village, I don't necessarily just mean our parents or our in-laws. The village includes uncles, aunts, cousins, hopefully. It's important to look at others and really believe in their good intention. They want to do right by their children. They want to do right by children of the family. And if we have grievances from the way that we were parented when we were children, it is important as we step into parenthood that we're able to look back and say, I understand that they had good intentions. I understand that they were trying to do their best and that they thought that what they were doing was helpful. This kind of compassion will help us be more able to accept help from this village, but also to be compassionate with ourselves. The harsher we are with others, the harsher we are with ourselves. When we believe that there was a part in our parents, for instance, that wanted to harm us, without even realizing, subconsciously, we are doubting ourselves and our intentions with our children. We start to wonder whether there is a part of us that actually doesn't care to do things well, or that could even have malicious intentions. And this is where it all begins. We start to believe that we have to prove our love. So by being able to look back at our experiences with our own parents and being able to say that they had the best intentions at heart, they were doing their best and they were following what was then considered best practice in order to give us a better future, in order for us to be well. What we are also doing is telling ourselves that we believe that we too are doing our best, that we are showing up with good intention. And so with this kind of trust in ourselves, we are releasing a lot of the stress that guides our actions that we later come to regret or feel shame around, because they weren't in line with our values and we don't know why we did them. Have you ever felt this way? That you acted in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise acted, but it's because you doubted yourself. You doubted your abilities. Before you get to the point to doubt your abilities as a parent, you have to have the belief, even if it's just 1%, that your natural tendency is not to do well by your child and that you need to keep tabs on yourself. I know that may be very hard to hear and it may sound impossible that you may think this way. Maybe I'm even making you angry by even suggesting this. But if you are angry right now, I'm going to dare and poke the bear just a little bit more and say, this anger says something. It means that maybe this hit the spot. any intense emotion, any intense reaction you might be getting, this like jerk of the knee that might be happening right now, if it is happening for you, then there may be more truth in what you heard than you may think. What I have seen with my clients time and time again is that we have great difficulty with forgiveness. And the reason why we don't forgive is because we think that if we forgive, we are going to allow people to treat us this way again, and we might allow ourselves to do the same. What we don't understand is that forgiveness is not about the other person. Forgiveness is about us, about letting go of that darkness that we hold within, that anger that keeps on traumatizing us again and again, because our brain doesn't realize past, present, or future. And so when we delve into things and when we don't forgive and when we hold on to this type of energy, we experience the same pain multiple times. So by acknowledging all of these issues, we can work toward creating a healthier and more supportive village today. One that will respect individual parenting style and will prioritize the well-being of both the parents and the children. By acknowledging that we might be holding on to grudges and grievances and traumas from our childhood, and that we might not trust others to be the best examples for our children, and that this mistrust may be creating more stress for us and a subconscious fear keeping us always on our toes, shifting all the responsibility onto us to heal ourselves, to heal the next generation, to do all the things to prevent the bad things from happening. We can at the very least release ourselves from the irrational fear that we don't have our children's best interest at heart. Now, moving on, there's another thought that I had about this question. And that is something that I've talked about in previous episodes, which is the thought, this subconscious notion that we have a manual to parenting. Society often treats parenting like a project. We take it on as something that we need to succeed in. And this mindset can lead to several problems. First, it leads to this notion that we can achieve perfection in parenting. Many of us feel immense pressure to be the perfect parent, someone who follows all the right guidelines, makes no mistakes, raises flawless children. This ideal is not only unrealistic, but it's also detrimental to our mental health, because it sets us up for a constant feeling of inadequacy and guilt when inevitably we fall short of these impossible standards and expectations. And like I alluded to before, this kind of pressure will lead us to become more controlling. We might try to micromanage every aspect of our children's lives to ensure that we meet our expectations. So then the one thing that you get is a very stressful home where both parents and children feel constantly judged and scrutinized. And you also get this kind of belief that no one else is good enough to take on this role. A lot of times we don't even think our partner is good enough to take on the task. We get into this cycle of consuming a lot of information, getting parenting advice, listening to podcasts, reading books, going on social media, finding courses, and getting all of these different perspectives on the right way to parent. And while, like I said in the previous episode, it's great to have resources, it can also create so much confusion and anxiety. Parenting is not about ticking off boxes or achieving perfection. It's about nurturing our child's individuality, supporting their growth, fostering a loving and safe environment. And going back to the village then, a lot of times we find ourselves very reluctant to rely on the village. And of course, I realize that a lot of people don't have a village anymore. But what we don't realize is that quite a few people do have some form of a village, maybe a tiny village. But they feel like they don't have anyone to support them. And that's not because there's not someone physically or emotionally there, but because they know that this someone, whoever that someone is, would be unwilling to follow specific instructions and the manual that they are pushing onto themselves while they try to be the perfect parent. We want a village, but we want the village to act in a very particular way and follow our very particular instructions. And let's be clear here. There are those parents or those in-laws or those cousins and uncles. There are people in the village that could actually be harmful, that it would be irresponsible to leave our kids with. But what I see a lot of times is that we have a distorted view of what is harmful That basically what we consider harmful is that this person gave my child French fries when I specifically said that they're not supposed to have anything fried. And I get it. That's disrespectful. That's going against the mom's wishes. That's imposing your own opinions on someone else's child. But it's not really harmful. It's really not the end of the world. We have much more time with our children. We are the ones that influence them the most. And so we could get hung up on all of these things, and we would be valid in doing so. Or we could demonstrate flexibility and allow our child to experience different types of people with different types of communication, with different approaches, and use that as a learning experience as well, as a topic of discussion when the kids are older, because they might notice. And they might start to form an opinion of their own about how they like certain things the way that they're done at home, and how it's interesting that they're different elsewhere, but they wonder how come. What I'm trying to say is that we need to shift our focus from trying to adhere to a perceived parenting manual and move into prioritizing emotional and psychological well-being. So where do we go from here? How do we find balance between fostering independence and embracing the support of a community? Is that even possible at this point? Well, it is. And the first thing that I would say is that it's really important to recognize that both self-sufficiency and community have their place in parenting. Striving to be a capable and independent parent is commendable, but we also need to understand that it's okay to ask for help and that it is good for our children to have more interactions. Raising children has always been a collective effort, and there's no shame in leaning on others for support. Rebuilding our villages in a way that honors both our need for support and the well-being of those who offer it is crucial. This starts by having clear expectations of what's going to happen and becoming more flexible. When previous generations enjoyed the advantages of a village, they were much more flexible in their parenting. And if we cannot have that kind of flexibility, if we can't accept that other people are not going to show up the way that we want to show up for our children just because we gave them instructions, just because it's our child and they need to respect how we want to raise them. If we can't accept this, then we are the ones that are rejecting the village. And that's totally fine. That's completely okay. You have every right to say that I have a very specific way that I want to raise my child, that I have very specific values that I want to instill, and that people from this so-called village are not aligned with who I am right now. Maybe you've worked really hard to break generational trauma. Maybe you were very negatively impacted by the way that your parents parent. Maybe you had parents that were great, but they were very anxious and they were very overprotective, and that's not something that you want your children to be around. That is fine. But in making this choice, you are relinquishing the opportunity to have a village. It would be wonderful if we could have a village and we could also tell them how to parent. The thing is, when the village existed, when the village was a norm, it was also the norm that the child would be passed to the aunt and to the mom and to the cousin, and that they would just take over and there were no instructions given. Not really. Not if there wasn't something very, very specific, like a medical need or something. And people would already know because these villages existed like a community that sometimes even lived in the same house or the same building. Mothers were okay with letting their children be with other members of the family and not having to step in or oversee or provide lists upon lists of things that can be said and can be done around the child. I know this may sound harsh, but that's exactly how we got to where we are. We don't want to relinquish any of the control. We want to control all of the variables. This has become a project, an experiment of sorts, and we want to make sure that we are fully overseeing what is happening. But then we yearn for this village, and why does that happen? Because we're burned out. If you're micromanaging everything at work, aren't you going to burn out? The same applies for parenthood. If you want to be the end-all be-all for your child, if you want to make sure that things are done a very particular way, If you believe that it's either your way or the highway, if you believe that you found the key to parenting and raising happy children, and you're very convinced that you're following the right way and others are not willing to do this, then it makes a lot of sense that you would not want other people getting involved so much, or at all for that matter. However, then, can you really prevent feeling stuck and overwhelmed and trapped in parenthood? Can you avoid the burnout? So we have become more isolated. We have become more individualistic. Because of the way that we live now, a lot of times we are at greater distances from one another. You may be living on the other side of the globe from where your village would normally be. And all of these are ways that we have lost the village. But we also need to recognize that part of the response that we get, part of that answer of your child is your responsibility and I am not in any way obligated to be there and to act as your village or as part of it. Well, that could be because there is that spoken or unspoken expectation that other people should follow your lead, that other people should follow your manual. In raising your child, I, as the relative, may be very willing to be there and to accommodate and to be a part of your child's life. But if you're giving me all of this instruction, I start to feel like you're doubting that I can do it. I start to feel like, and especially think about this from your parents' point of view, I start to feel like you thought I was a very bad parent, that you don't trust my abilities, that you're judging how I raised you, and that you're now trying to reteach me the right way to parent. And while you may not be trying to do this, you may be coming from a place of insecurity yourself because you've been led to believe that success is being able to do it all yourself. I may be triggered in ways that you don't understand. And so now I don't feel good about taking this responsibility. I feel criticized and judged. At the same time, you may feel judged when I start to do things my way, despite the fact that you told me what to do. You may think that I believe my method is better, whereas what I'm doing is what I know how. This creates misunderstandings and it creates a distance. So then, yes, we are missing the village, we have lost the village, and we need the village. But when we do have it, if we did have it, would we use it? Do those of us who have the village allow people to step in, to step forward, and to be present in our lives and our children's lives in the way that they can show up for them? Or do we place conditions on them and make them feel unwelcome and make them feel like we don't trust them? And so they feel hurt and they step back. There are a lot of caveats and a lot of disclaimers that I probably have missed. I don't want to be misunderstood here. I recognize that there is a tremendous lack of support. There is a tremendous need. And that many of us truly feel that we would welcome it if we had it. But the more I work with parents, the more I see that there are people who are willing to step in and help, but that we aren't ready to receive that help if it's not done on our terms. And again, we have every right to do that. We have every right to say that. We have every right to choose how we will parent our children. But then, can we really get mad about the fact that we are told that this is our responsibility, that it was our choice to have children and it's our responsibility to raise them? The answer, I believe, is somewhere in the middle. It is important that we're able to trust the people that are around our children. We need to ensure that our children are safe, that they're around people who are aligned at least as much as possible with our values. At the very least, that they're not people who are completely against our values. We want to make sure that they're protected. But then if we're going to be nitpicky and if we're not going to want to accept help because, the person doesn't follow the Montessori type of approach and I can't stand that. Or they don't understand that I don't give them even a grain of sugar and they gave them a sweet. Now it's different if we're going to give, let's say, honey to a child that's less than 1 year old when now we know that we're not supposed to do that. That is a safety concern. That is different. But if our problem is something that's not going to cause harm or put our children in risky situations, then it's important to understand that we need to take a step back as well. So if this has resonated with you at all, If you're wondering whether the lines are blurred and whether you might be accepting less help than you can because you want to prove yourself or because you can't be flexible enough, or whether certain things that you might want and are not being done are not disrespect and are not harmful, then write your thoughts down in your journal. What came up for you as I was saying all of this in today's episode? Were there any points where you got quite emotional, whether that was intense frustration or anger or sadness? Where might you be able to let go of a little bit of control? Where might it be okay to be flexible? In which areas would it be okay and safe to say, it's fine? It's not the end of the world. It's not actually harmful. And it's not something that can be so ingrained when I'm the primary caregiver and I know what I am doing and how much I am doing to pass on what's really important and valuable for our family. Well, I hope you found this different type of episode interesting and insightful. Whether you agree or strongly disagree, I hope that you will share it with others and that you will also share your thoughts with me on Instagram by DMing me at markella.kaplani. It was great spending another Sunday with you, and I hope I'll see you here next week. Until then, take care of yourself and remember that flexibility is the number one sign of mental, psychological, and emotional well-being. You deserve it, your relationships deserve it, your children deserve it. See you next Sunday.